I watched Professor Oakes preen on stage, accepting an award for his groundbreaking Ethereum composite, the very material he'd dismissed as amateur scribble when I submitted it. His smug smile was unbearable. Little did he know, the entire research department celebrating him, the gleaming new lab wing, every single piece of advanced equipment, was all paid for by me, the amateur he just stole from. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. I had poured my very soul into the Ethereum composite. It wasn't just a project, it was years of whispered hypotheses, countless failed experiments, and then that thrilling moment when the pieces finally clicked. The matte, iridescent dark gray material, sleek and rigid, yet so impossibly light, felt like destiny in my hands. Its promise to heal itself, to make structures last almost forever, all while being kind to our planet. It was everything I believed in. I envisioned it reshaping industries, making life better for everyone, and reducing the heavy footprint we left on the Earth. The thought of bringing it into the world filled me with such a quiet, humming joy. For years, I had quietly supported promising research through my foundation, often anonymously. One of the recipients, a major beneficiary in fact, was the Advanced Materials Research Department at the local university. It was a place I truly believed could foster the next generation of innovators. Naturally, when I felt the Ethereum composite was ready for broader academic review, I turned there first. I carefully prepared my detailed research proposal and preliminary findings, outlining the blend of lab-grown graphene nanotubes, advanced biopolymers from specialized algae, and that unique, non-toxic catalyst that allowed for ambient temperature curing. I wanted to collaborate, to share this breakthrough with minds who could expand on its potential. And I thought Professor Herbert Oakes, as the head of the department, would be the ideal person to evaluate it. I'd heard whispers about Professor Oakes's ego, of course, but I always hoped that a true passion for science would outweigh any personal quirks. When I submitted my proposal, I requested an initial, informal review, hoping to gauge their interest before a more formal presentation. A few weeks later, a crisp, dismissive email arrived. It wasn't even from Oakes directly, but from his assistant, relaying his exact words. Professor Oakes finds Ms. Fry's submission amateurish, lacking in academic rigor, and frankly, too fanciful for serious scientific consideration. He suggests she stick to less ambitious endeavors. My heart sank, not just from the rejection, but from the condescension. Fanciful? I had patents, real-world applications, and the data to back every single claim. Yet, I told myself that perhaps my approach was too unconventional for the established academic world. I decided to pursue patenting the Ethereum composite independently, something I had intended to do regardless. But the sting of Oakes's words lingered like a bad taste. Then, 6 months later, it happened. I was at a low-key university networking event, one of many I attended to identify new projects for my foundation. Professor Oakes was holding court, surrounded by adoring faculty and eager students. He was beaming, gesturing dramatically towards a display table. My gaze drifted to what he was showcasing, and a cold dread washed over me. There, under a spotlight, was a sleek, dark gray material. It had that distinct matte, almost iridescent finish. It was the Ethereum composite. My breath hitched. My revolutionary, lightweight, self-healing material was on display, but it wasn't attributed to me. Professor Oakes was speaking with grand flourishes, explaining its groundbreaking properties, its unprecedented strength-to-weight ratio, its eco-friendly manufacturing. He spoke of lab-grown graphene, biopolymers from algae, and an ambient curing catalyst using my precise terminology. Every word was a dagger, twisting deeper with each boastful pronouncement. He was taking full credit, accepting congratulations for my discovery, the one he had so cruelly labeled amateurish and fanciful. My world, for a moment, truly shattered. My work, my years of dedication, reduced to a stolen trophy in the hands of an arrogant fraud. It was an insult so profound, so brazen, that I simply stood there, frozen, the warm glow of the event fading into a chilling spotlight on his unforgivable betrayal. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the blatant theft, but all I could hear was the echo of his dismissive words, now ringing hollow and utterly hypocritical. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the blatant theft, but all I could hear was the echo of his dismissive words, now ringing hollow and utterly hypocritical. I remember turning away from that preening display, a cold resolve settling deep in my bones. The vibrant chatter of the university event faded into a muffled hum as I walked out, my focus sharpening with every step. The initial shock gave way to a steely determination. Professor Oakes had stolen my past work, but he wouldn't steal my future. I retreated to my sanctuary, my private lab nestled away from prying eyes. It wasn't just a workspace. It was a testament to years of quiet dedication, a place where ideas bloomed without the need for external validation. Gleaming scientific instruments lined the workbenches, each one carefully chosen and calibrated. Rows of meticulously labeled vials and beakers held the fruits of countless experiments, a silent library of chemical compounds and novel materials. The air always carried a faint, clean scent of solvents and ozone, a comforting aroma that signaled purpose and progress. Here, surrounded by my own creations, the sting of Oakes's betrayal transformed into a potent fuel. I began to work with a renewed intensity, not to simply recreate the Ethereum composite, but to push its boundaries even further. I laid out the pristine, lab-grown graphene nanotubes, so delicate they looked like shimmering dust, yet held such incredible promise. Beside them, the specialized biopolymers, a thick, verdant liquid derived from a unique strain of algae I had cultivated, waited for their moment. My unique, non-toxic catalyst, a clear, shimmering fluid, was measured with utmost precision. Every step was deliberate, every measurement exact. I understood these materials intimately, their dance and interplay under various conditions. I meticulously blended the components, watching the transformative chemistry unfold. The mixture slowly took on that familiar matte, almost iridescent dark gray sheen as it began its ambient temperature curing. I worked late into the nights, fueled by strong coffee and an unshakable belief in my material. I fashioned a thin, sleek panel, about the size of a small notebook, from the composite. It was rigid, impossibly light, and smooth to the touch. This wasn't just raw material. It was a proof of concept, a tangible defiance. The time came for the true test. I placed the finished Ethereum composite panel onto a specialized stress testing rig, a device I had designed myself. With a deep breath, I activated the machine. Hydraulic clamps gripped the edges of the panel, slowly applying pressure. The digital readout climbed steadily, indicating the immense force being exerted. I watched, my eyes glued to the material, waiting for any sign of strain. The panel held. It groaned, it resisted, but it refused to break. The numbers on the screen surpassed any conventional material I had ever tested, exceeding even my own high expectations for its strength-to-weight ratio. Then, for the self-healing test, I took a small, sharp tool and intentionally scratched the surface, creating a fine, almost invisible fracture. It felt almost sacrilegious to mar my perfect creation, but it was necessary. I then applied a specific frequency of low-level thermal energy, mimicking the microscopic activation I had engineered into the material. Before my very eyes, the tiny scratch began to diminish, closing in on itself until it disappeared entirely, leaving the surface flawless once more. A quiet, triumphant smile spread across my face. The Ethereum composite wasn't just a material. It was a living testament to innovation, resilient and unyielding, just like the spirit that had created it. This was my answer, a silent promise to the universe that true brilliance, once unleashed, could never truly be stolen. That quiet, triumphant smile stayed with me long after I had packed away my test equipment. The Ethereum composite was even more remarkable than I had dared to hope. It was ready for the world, but first, ready for a demonstration that would make Professor Oakes's stolen glory seem utterly insignificant. My plan wasn't just about reclaiming my innovation. It was about proving a point, loudly and clearly, that true value isn't found in a flashy presentation, but in genuine, sustainable progress. A few days later, I found myself in a bustling public square, not far from the university campus, dressed in old work clothes, practical and unassuming. Beside me was a small, rather ordinary-looking cart, laden with a few specific types of discarded items: cracked plastic casings from old electronics, a warped piece of composite decking, and a section of a rusted metal pipe. To the casual observer, I was just another eccentric, perhaps a local scavenger, sifting through society's discards. I meticulously examined each piece, holding it up, turning it over in my gloved hands, making notes in a small, weathered notebook. My focus was absolute, my gaze thoughtful and intense. Before long, a small crowd started to gather, drawn by the unusual sight. Whispers turned into snickers. "Look at her," I heard one young man say, nudging his friend. "Collecting trash in the middle of the day. Some people, huh?" A woman laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. "Doesn't she know there are recycling centers for that? What does she think she's doing?" Their voices were filled with a mix of amusement and mild disdain, a casual cruelty that didn't touch me in the slightest. I simply continued my work, unfazed, occasionally even smiling faintly to myself as I made a particularly insightful observation about a corroded joint or a brittle plastic hinge. Soon, the bright flash of a smartphone camera caught my eye. A young woman, barely out of her teens, was openly filming me, her face alight with a smirk. She held the phone aloft, narrating in a loud, dramatic whisper. "And here we have the urban treasure hunter, folks, finding untold riches in discarded plastic. Maybe she's building a new house out of old phone cases." Her friend giggled, chiming in, "Or a new career." They clearly thought it was hilarious, a quaint and silly spectacle for their social media feed. I just nodded politely, as if they were complimenting my efforts, and went back to inspecting a particularly flimsy piece of polymer. The video, I later learned, quickly made its rounds online. It wasn't a viral sensation, but it did gain enough traction for local residents to recognize me as the junk lady from the square. Comments ranged from mocking sympathy to outright ridicule. "Bless her heart," someone wrote, "trying to make something out of nothing," another added, followed by a string of laughing emojis. They found my dedication amusing, my efforts pitiful, my very presence a source of light entertainment. They saw a woman with a cart full of what they considered garbage, and they judged me accordingly. But their laughter and dismissive comments were like distant background noise to me, no more impactful than the rustling leaves in the park. My purpose was far grander than their fleeting amusement. By evening, my mission in the square complete, I returned to my lab. The clean, scientific hum a soothing balm after the day's public theater. I carefully unloaded the selected items from my cart, placing them on a pristine white bench beside a freshly prepared sample of the Ethereum composite. The difference was stark, a silent promise of what was to come. I picked up a delicate graphene nanotube structure, ready to continue my work, completely unbothered, utterly focused on the real revolution unfolding quietly in my sanctuary. That evening, back in my lab, the hum of the ventilation system was a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. I was carefully sorting the collected discarded items, separating them by material composition, ready for the next phase of my work. The pristine white benches glowed under the soft overhead lights, a stark contrast to the gritty realities of the public square. My mind was already churning with new ideas for sustainable recycling using the Ethereum composite, how it could bond with and transform waste into something truly valuable. My private lab was more than just a place for experiments. It was a fortress of innovation. Years ago, I had learned the hard way that groundbreaking ideas attract not just admiration, but also unscrupulous ambition. So, when I designed this space, I factored in every conceivable vulnerability. Layers of security, both visible and invisible, were woven into its very structure, a quiet testament to my foresight. It wasn't long before the ripples of Professor Oakes's fraudulent presentation, and even the fleeting viral snippets of me in the square, began to spread through the more predatory corners of the industrial world. Information, like water, always finds a way. A few days after my street performance, I received an unusually persistent string of emails from a shadowy corporate entity, one notorious in the advanced materials sector for its aggressive acquisition strategies and less-than-ethical tactics. They expressed a sudden, overwhelming interest in collaborating on novel composite technologies, mentioning Oakes's supposed breakthrough with an almost casual confidence that bordered on insinuation. I simply archived them, a faint smile playing on my lips. Their veiled overtures were as transparent as a window pane. Then came the more direct approach. One moonless night, the silent alarms in my lab activated, not the blaring, attention-grabbing kind, but a soft, almost imperceptible vibration transmitted directly to a discrete device on my wrist. I was at home, enjoying a cup of herbal tea and a good book, when the faint tremor began. My heart didn't even quicken. I merely glanced at the small screen, which displayed a precise schematic of my lab, pinpointing the intrusion. A professional team, it seemed, attempting a quiet entry through a less-used service tunnel I had deliberately left as a tempting, yet utterly secure, choke point. I watched on a secure monitor as 3 figures, clad in dark, silent gear, meticulously navigated the tunnel. They moved with a practiced grace, their tools making barely a sound as they bypassed security measures that would stump most experts. But these measures were not designed for most experts. They were designed for the few who thought they were. Their progress was slow, deliberate, each step a testament to their assumed expertise. They believed they were infiltrating a vulnerable private lab, an easy target for a quick snatch and grab of valuable samples and data. Unbeknownst to them, every single valuable sample in that particular section of the lab was a perfectly crafted decoy, indistinguishable from the real thing to the naked eye, but utterly useless to replicate. The data drives were loaded with old, publicly available research papers. I had meticulously prepared for this, a carefully laid trap for exactly this kind of audacious move. My real research, my true breakthroughs, were stored elsewhere, in a location no one could ever guess. As I watched the figures finally breach the inner sanctum of the decoy lab, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, I couldn't help but let a small, knowing smile touch my lips. They were exactly where I wanted them. The dark figures moved with chilling efficiency inside my decoy lab. Flashlights cut through the gloom as they systematically swept the room, their gloved hands swiftly bagging the carefully prepared samples and data drives. I watched them on my monitor, a faint trace of amusement on my lips. They believed they were collecting the crown jewels, the culmination of Oakes's supposedly groundbreaking work, material that would grant them an insurmountable edge in the cutthroat world of advanced composites. Each sealed bag, each downloaded file, was another link in the chain I had been so meticulously forging. They worked silently, their movements fluid and practiced, completely unaware that every item they meticulously collected was a piece of a much larger, far more intricate puzzle. The decoy samples, visually identical to the true Ethereum composite, were designed to be just advanced enough to pique interest, but contain subtle, non-replicable flaws that would reveal their true nature upon deeper analysis. The data drives, filled with a mix of cleverly disguised public information and outdated research, would lead them on a wild goose chase, consuming their resources and time. I knew the moment they left, thinking themselves victorious, their real troubles would only just begin. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. Their hurried departure, silent as their arrival, left the decoy lab looking undisturbed, a ghost of its former self. My next steps were already in motion. Months ago, long before Oakes's public presentation, I had discreetly filed provisional patents for every aspect of the Ethereum composite, complete with detailed scientific data, manufacturing processes, and stress test results. These were dated, sealed, and legally unimpeachable. The proposal I had submitted to Oakes's department, which he so arrogantly dismissed, was simply a precursor to these official filings, a testament to my good faith and a historical record of my original concept. Now, with the corporate entity having illicitly acquired my material, they were unwittingly providing the final crucial piece of evidence. They had stolen the Ethereum composite, a material that Oakes had publicly claimed as his own, yet which demonstrably existed under my independent development. The very act of their theft, once revealed, would confirm that Oakes's claims were baseless. How could he be the sole inventor if another entity had to break into a private lab to steal his purported creation, a creation which, upon close inspection, would match my original patent filings? The stolen goods would be the irrefutable proof. I calmly initiated the process. A series of encrypted emails were sent to my legal team, containing instructions to immediately file for full patent protection and to prepare for an intellectual property infringement lawsuit. The target wouldn't just be the shadowy corporate entity, but also, indirectly, Professor Oakes and the university that had so blithely endorsed his fraud. The legal machinery, slow and methodical, was now grinding into motion, driven by the very arrogance that had sought to bury my work. Within days, the corporate entity that had dispatched the intruders found themselves in a bind. Their initial analysis of the stolen samples showed promising results, enough to confirm its revolutionary potential. But as they dug deeper into the data drives and attempted to reverse engineer the material, discrepancies began to emerge. Then came the bombshell. My legal team's filings made public. A wave of panicked confusion swept through their boardrooms. They had paid a hefty sum and taken significant risks to steal what they believed was Professor Oakes's breakthrough. But the patents now surfacing were unequivocally linked to a completely different name, a name they had dismissed as an amateur and a junk lady, Joyce Fry. The material they held was suddenly not just stolen, but stolen from the wrong person. And that person was now legally asserting her rights. Their triumph had curdled into a devastating, very public liability. They had tangled with an opponent they utterly failed to understand, and the true cost of their short-sighted greed was about to become terrifyingly clear. The corporate entity's frantic scramble to understand their disastrous misstep became clear even through the hushed legal channels. Their stolen breakthrough was now a ticking time bomb, legally entangled and publicly linked not to the celebrated Professor Oakes, but to me, Joyce Fry, a name they had so carelessly dismissed. I allowed myself a quiet smile, knowing the true implications of their folly were only just beginning to unfold within their mahogany boardrooms. The trap was sprung, and they were firmly caught. It wasn't long after that, amidst the burgeoning legal storm, that an unexpected email landed in my inbox. It was an invitation, subtly worded, to present new research at the Global Summit on Sustainable Materials, a highly prestigious international conference. The initial contact was made through a neutral academic foundation, known for championing underrepresented innovators. They had heard whispers, they said, of groundbreaking work in eco-friendly composites, and were intrigued. I accepted, of course, without revealing my full identity, simply as J. Fry. I knew this was the global stage I needed, an arena where true innovation, not stolen accolades, would speak for itself. Preparing for the summit felt different from my usual lab work. This wasn't about meticulous calculations or precise measurements. It was about curating a presentation that would be undeniably clear, elegant in its simplicity, yet devastating in its impact. I carefully selected specific samples of the true Ethereum composite, sleek, dark gray pieces that shimmered faintly under light, each one a testament to years of quiet dedication. I also prepared a simplified visual presentation, focusing on the material's real-world applications and, crucially, its entirely sustainable life cycle. There would be no jargon, no academic posturing, just pure, undeniable science. The day of the summit arrived, cool and crisp. The conference hall was a grand, modern edifice, all glass and polished steel, bustling with sharp suits and even sharper minds. Industry leaders, renowned academics, and eager investors milled about, their voices a low murmur of ambition and intellect. I walked in dressed simply, in a comfortable charcoal gray blazer and dark trousers, my hair neatly pulled back, carrying a modest laptop bag. I looked like an attendee, perhaps a junior researcher, certainly not someone about to deliver a presentation that would shake the foundations of their industry. I noticed a few curious glances, quickly dismissed when they saw my unassuming demeanor. No one recognized the junk lady from the square or the silent benefactor of a certain university department. I liked it that way. As my scheduled presentation time approached, I made my way backstage, a quiet oasis away from the clamor. My heart beat a steady rhythm, not of nerves, but of anticipation. I adjusted the microphone, checked the projection, and took a deep, centering breath. The familiar scent of the stage, a mix of dust and anticipation, filled my lungs. When my name, J. Fry, was called, a polite ripple of applause, mostly obligatory, greeted me. I walked confidently onto the brightly lit stage, my carefully chosen samples arranged on the podium. The audience, a sea of expectant faces, hushed. I looked out at them, a warm, knowing smile playing on my lips. It was time. A ripple of expectation, mixed with polite curiosity, spread through the audience as I approached the podium. I adjusted the microphone, letting my gaze sweep over the faces, some eager, some skeptical. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice clear and calm. "My name is Joyce Fry." I paused, letting the full name hang in the air for a moment. "And I'm here today to introduce you to a material that I believe will redefine our future, the Ethereum composite." I picked up a sleek, dark gray panel from the podium, holding it up for everyone to see. It had that matte, almost iridescent finish, subtly catching the light. "This isn't just another material," I explained. "It's a testament to what's possible when we challenge conventional thinking. The Ethereum composite is a revolutionary, lightweight, self-healing material. Its strength-to-weight ratio is simply unprecedented, making it perfect for everything from aerospace to sustainable infrastructure. I placed the panel back down and brought up a simple diagram on the large screen behind me. What truly sets Ethereum apart, however, is its entirely eco-friendly manufacturing process. We're talking about a proprietary blend of lab-grown graphene nanotubes, advanced biopolymers derived from a specialized strain of algae, and a unique, non-toxic catalyst that allows for ambient temperature curing. No harsh chemicals, no massive energy consumption, just pure innovation. To illustrate its resilience, I picked up a smaller, thinner piece of the composite. "Watch this," I said, and with a confident motion, I struck it firmly with a small, weighted hammer. The sound was a sharp, clean clink, but the material remained perfectly intact, not even a scratch. A few gasps broke the silence, followed by murmurs of impressed surprise. "And its self-healing capabilities," I continued, "mean structures built from Ethereum can instantly repair microscopic fractures, extending their lifespan exponentially." Then I shifted to the aspect that would really hit home for some in the audience. But here's where the true magic lies. My research began with a simple question. What if we could turn our biggest problems into our greatest solutions? Ethereum composite isn't just new, it's transformative. Imagine taking the discarded electronics and plastics that clog our landfills, the very waste we throw away every day, and transforming them into something not just useful, but revolutionary. I clicked to a slide showing images of everyday waste being processed into raw materials, then integrated into the composite structure. We've developed methods to break down and reintegrate these discarded materials, essentially giving our waste a second, more powerful life within the Ethereum composite. In the third row, a man in a sharp, dark suit, representing the corporate entity that had sent intruders into my decoy lab, leaned forward. His initial expression had been one of detached appraisal, a professional interest in a potential competitor. But as I spoke of the unique blend of graphene, biopolymers, and the very specific discarded waste integration, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He had seen the preliminary analyses of the stolen material, the same material I was describing. The realization, slow at first, then hitting him like a physical blow, began to drain the color from his face. The amateur was not only legitimate, but had just publicly laid claim to their stolen secret. The man in the third row, the corporate representative, didn't just look ill. He looked like a man whose entire future had just crumbled before his eyes. His frantic whispers to his colleagues were visible even from the stage, a desperate attempt to reconcile what they had stolen with what I had just so calmly, so precisely revealed. The room was buzzing, not with the polite murmurs from before, but with an excited, almost breathless energy. Questions started to fly, but I simply smiled, thanked everyone for their time, and promised further details would be made public very soon. My part on the stage was done for now. Back in my quiet sanctuary, my legal team was already moving with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. The patent filings, now fully public and irrefutable, served as the foundation. The corporate entity's illicit acquisition of my decoy samples, which they had foolishly taken as their own, became the undeniable proof. My legal team made it clear that they had not only stolen intellectual property, but had done so under false pretenses, believing it was Professor Oakes's work, only to find themselves ensnared in a fraud of their own making. The evidence was overwhelming, a carefully constructed web of truth. The lawsuit that followed was, as I intended, swift and decisive. It played out not with dramatic courtroom confrontations, but through the relentless presentation of facts and documentation. The initial shock within the corporate entity quickly gave way to panic, then to a desperate scramble to mitigate the damage. But there was no mitigating the truth. My provisional patents, time-stamped and independently verified, predated any claims Oaks had ever made. The stolen samples, when subjected to forensic analysis, bore subtle but distinct markers that linked them directly to my initial, publicly available research proposals, not to Oaks's vague and unsupported assertions. I watched the news unfold from a distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction blossom in my chest. There was no triumphant glee, no desire for public humiliation, just the steady comfort of seeing justice take its course. The headlines, once celebrating Professor Oaks's breakthrough, now spoke of corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and widespread fraud. The company's stock plummeted, their reputation in tatters. Investors began pulling out, fearing the legal repercussions and the irreversible damage to their brand. The public, especially those who followed environmental initiatives, quickly turned against them. They had tried to profit from a stolen, eco-friendly innovation, turning it into a corporate scandal. There was no recovering from such a betrayal of trust. Within a few short weeks, the once mighty corporate entity, whose greed had led them to believe they could simply snatch what they wanted, began to unravel. Their board resigned, their assets were frozen, and the doors to their gleaming headquarters, once a symbol of innovation and power, were finally, irrevocably, locked. The silence that fell over their campus was absolute, a stark monument to their spectacular downfall. The silence that fell over the corporate campus was indeed absolute, a stark monument to their spectacular downfall. With that behemoth crumbling, my legal team turned their full, meticulous attention to the university, and specifically to Professor Herbert Oaks. The evidence against him was overwhelming. My initial detailed research proposal, time-stamped and independently verified, stood as an unassailable document. His dismissive written critiques, once meant to crush my aspirations, now served as damning proof of his arrogance and willful ignorance. The subsequent theft and public presentation of my decoy material, which he had so eagerly claimed as his own, cemented his fraud. The university, facing public outcry, a flurry of media investigations, and the very real threat of legal action for negligence and complicity, moved with astonishing speed. Professor Oaks was stripped of his tenure, removed from his prestigious position as head of the Advanced Materials Research Department, and ultimately quietly escorted from the premises. It wasn't a dramatic public spectacle, but a cold, clinical dismantling of his academic career, sending shockwaves through the entire institution. My professional standing was not merely restored, it was elevated to a level of undeniable reverence within the scientific community. The patents for the Ethereum composite, now undeniably mine, became foundational texts, hailed as a true leap forward in sustainable technology. The university, in a carefully worded public statement, issued a formal apology for their unfortunate oversight and acknowledged my pioneering contributions. Offers poured in. An endowed chair, a newly constructed research facility bearing my name, and substantial funding for any projects I wished to pursue. It was a stark and humbling contrast to the closed doors and condescending tones I had once encountered within those very halls. But the most profound sense of peace came when I finally stepped back into my family home. The legal proceedings had returned it to me, meticulously cleared of any lingering liens or disputes. The familiar scent of aged wood, forgotten spices, and quiet memories enveloped me. A gentle embrace after years of living in the temporary and the anonymous. That first night, I simply lay in my own bed, the soft mattress a luxurious reprieve from the utilitarian comfort I'd grown accustomed to. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver stripes across the familiar patterns of my quilt. It felt like coming home in the truest sense, a deep, abiding peace settling over me, washing away the years of quiet struggle. I wasn't just in my house. I was back in my life, whole and completely my own again. The financial settlement from the now-defunct corporate entity, combined with the university's substantial efforts to compensate for their earlier oversight, was truly immense. It was more money than I could ever possibly need, adding to the quiet fortune I had already accumulated through my other patents and investments. I spent days pondering what to do with it, knowing this wasn't about personal gain anymore. It was about legacy, about correcting the imbalances and preventing future injustices. Then it hit me, a clear, unmistakable path forward. A warm smile touched my lips as the perfect, most surprising idea took root in my mind. The perfect, most surprising idea for the fortune that had now fallen into my lap began to crystallize as I gazed out at the familiar, moonlit garden of my family home. It wasn't about accumulating more. It was about protecting the spark of brilliance in others. I decided to establish the Ethereum Foundation, dedicated to supporting independent researchers and overlooked innovators, particularly those working in sustainable materials and overlooked technologies. It would provide grants, resources, and mentorship, ensuring that no truly groundbreaking work would ever again be dismissed as amateur, simply because it didn't originate from a prestigious university or carry a well-known name. I thought about my own journey, from the quiet hum of my home lab, where the initial breakthroughs for the Ethereum composite first took shape, to the harsh realities of trying to navigate a world that often valued pomp over genuine progress. I remembered the stinging words of Professor Oakes, his sneering dismissal, which had fueled my resolve more than he could ever know. His arrogance, once a heavy cloak of power, had become a thin, flimsy veil, easily torn by the light of truth. He never truly understood that real innovation doesn't need grand pronouncements or a corner office. It only needs a curious mind and the freedom to explore. My work, my quiet dedication, had started as a solitary pursuit, fueled by a passion for creating a better world. It had been forged in the crucible of my own ingenuity, far from the hallowed, but ultimately insular, halls of academia. The journey had taken me through carefully constructed deceptions, a public reveal that felt both exhilarating and strangely vulnerable, and ultimately to a place of profound peace and recognition. The Ethereum composite itself was a tangible representation of what I had built. But the foundation was something more. It was a shield, a beacon, a promise to future innovators. What I had truly built, what no one could ever take away, wasn't just a revolutionary material or a substantial fortune. It was a legacy of belief in the unseen potential, in the quiet genius that often blooms outside the established systems. It was the knowledge that I had fought for truth, not just for myself, but for the countless others who might, like me, find their ideas undervalued by those who mistook their own limited understanding for universal wisdom. The university eventually named a new research wing after me, but the real monument was in the spirit of discovery I hoped to foster. I smiled, a genuine, deep-seated happiness blooming in my chest. My name, once whispered in contempt, was now spoken with respect, a symbol of perseverance and true intellectual courage. The world finally knew the truth, not just about the Ethereum composite, but about the source of its creation. It was a beautiful, hard-won victory. Innovation doesn't have an address. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.